Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes for story time. It's been a few days since our first chapter in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet. In part one of A Study in Scarlet, we saw Dr. Watson we learned of Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes meeting for the first time and then collaborating to solve a murder before the police could solve it. But that was part one, which all occurred in London. Now we go to A Study in Scarlet, part two, which takes us to an entirely different continent. So let's get started. A Study in Scarlet, part two. The Country of the Saints, chapter 1. On the great alkali plain, in the central portion of the great North American continent, there lies an arid and repulsive desert, which for many a long year served as a barrier against the advance of civilization. From the Sierra Nevada to Nebraska, and from the Yellowstone River in the north to the Colorado upon the south, is a region of desolation and silence. Nor is nature always in one mood throughout this grim district. It comprises snow-capped and lofty mountains and dark and gloomy valleys. There are swift flowing rivers which dash through jagged canyons. And there are enormous plains which in winter are white with snow and in summer are gray with the saline alkali dust. They all preserve, however, the common characteristics of the barrenness, inhospitality, and misery. There are no inhabitants of this land of despair. A band of Pawnees or Blackfeet may occasionally traverse it in order to reach the other hunting grounds. But the hardiest of the braves are glad to lose sight of those awesome plains and to find themselves once more upon their prairies. The coyote skulks among the scrub, the buzzards flap heavily through the air, and the clumsy grizzly bear lumbers through the dark ravines and picks up such sustenance as it can among the rocks. These are the sole dwellers in the wilderness. In the whole world there can be no more dreary view than from the northern slope of the Sierra Blanco, far as the eye can reach stretches of great, flat plainland, all dusted over with patches of alkali, and intersected by clumps of the darfish chaparral bushes. On the extreme verge of the horizon lies a long chain of mountain peaks, with their rigid summits flecked with snow. In this great stretch of country there is no sign of life, nor of any appertaining to life. There is no bird in the steel blue heaven, no movement upon the dull gray earth. Above all, there is absolute silence. Listen as one may, there is no shadow of sound in all the mighty wilderness, nothing but silence, complete and heart-subduing silence. It has been said there is nothing appertaining to life upon the broad plain. That is hardly true. Looking down from the Sierra Blanco, one sees a pathway traced out across the desert, which winds its way and is lost in the extreme distance. It is rutted with wheels and trodden down by the feet of many adventurers. Here and there are scattered white objects, which glisten in the sun and stand out against the dull deposit of alkali. Approach and examine them. They are bones, some large and coarse, others small and more delicate. The former have belonged to oxen, and the latter to men. For 1,500 miles, one may trace this ghastly caravan route through these scattered remains of what those who had fallen by the wayside had experienced. Looking down on this very scene, there stood upon the 4th of May, 1847, a solitary traveler. His appearance was such that he might have been the very genius or demon of the region. An observer would have found it difficult to say whether he was nearer to 40 or to 60. His face was lean and haggard, and the brown parchment-like skin was drawn tightly over the projecting bones. His long brown hair and beard were all flecked and dashed with white. His eyes were sunken in his head and burned with an unnatural luster, which grasped his rifle. While the hand which grasped his rifle was hardly more fleshy than that of a skeleton. As he stood, he leaned upon his weapon for support, and yet his tall figure and the massive framework of the bones suggested a wiry and vigorous constitution. His gaunt face, however, and his clothes, which hung so baggily over his shriveled limbs, proclaimed what it was that gave him that senile and decrepit appearance. The man was dying from hunger and from thirst. He had toiled painfully down the ravine and onto this little elevation in the vain hope of seeing some sign of water. Now the great salt plain stretched before his eyes, and the distant belt savage mountains, without a sign anywhere of a plant or tree, which might indicate the presence of moisture. In all that broad landscape there was no gleam of hope. North and east and west he looked with wild, questioning eyes, and then he realized that his wanderings had come to an end, and that there, on that barren crag, he was about to die. Why not here as well as in a feather bed 20 years hence, he muttered, as he seated himself in the shelter of a boulder. Before sitting down, he had deposited upon the ground his useless rifle, and also a large bundle tied in a gray shawl, which he carried slung over his right shoulder. It appeared to be somewhat too heavy for his strength, for in lowering it, it came down to the ground with some little violence. Instantly there broke from the gray parcel a little moaning cry, and from it there protruded a small, scared face, and with very bright brown eyes, the two little speckled dimpled fists. "You've hurt me," said a childish voice reproachfully. "Have I, though?" the man answered penitently. I didn't go for to do it." As he spoke, he unwrapped the gray shawl and extricated a pretty little girl of about 5 years of age, whose dainty shoes and smart pink frock, with its little linen apron, all bespoke a mother's care. The child was pale and wan, but her healthy arms and legs showed she had suffered less than her companion. "How is it now?" he asked, anxiously, for she was still rubbing her towsy golden curls, which covered the back of her head. "Kiss it and make it well," she said, and with perfect gravity, shoving the injured part up to him. "That's what Mother used to do." "Where's Mother?" "Mother's gone. I guess you'll see her before long." "Gone, eh?" said the little girl. "Funny, she didn't say goodbye. She most always did if she was just going over to Auntie's for tea, and now she's been away for 3 days. Say, it's awful dry, ain't it?" "Ain't there no water nor nothing to eat?" "No, there ain't nothing, dearie. You'll just need to be patient a while, and then you'll be all right. Put your head up agin me like that, and then you'll feel better. It ain't easy to talk when your lips is like leather, but I guess I'd best let you know how the cards lie." "What's that you've got?" "Pretty little things, fine things," cried the little girl enthusiastically, holding up 2 glittering fragments of mica. When we goes back home, I'll give them to Brother Bob." "You'll see prettier things than them soon," said the man confidently. You just wait a bit. I was going to tell you, though, you remember when we left the river?" "Oh, yes. Well, we reckoned we'd strike another river soon. D'ye see? But there was something wrong, compasses or maps or something, and it didn't turn up. We ran out of water, just except a little drop for the likes of you, and you couldn't wash yourself," interrupted his companion gravely, staring up at his grimy visage. "No, nor drink. And Mr. Bender, he was the first to go, and then the Indian Pete, and then Mrs. Gregor, and then Johnny Holmes, and then, dearie, your mother. Then mother's a dead or two? Cried the little girl, dropping her face in a pinafore and sobbing bitterly. Yes, they all went except you and me. Then I thought there was some chance of water in this direction, so I heaved you over my shoulder and we tramped it together. It don't seem as though we've improved matters. There is an almighty small chance for us now. Do you mean that we're going to die too? Asked the child, checking her sobs and raising her tear-stained face. I guess that's about the size of it. Why didn't you say so before? She said, laughing gleefully. You gave me such a fright. Why, of course, now, as long as we die, we'll be with Mother again. Yes, you will, dearie. And you too? I tell her how awful good you've been. I'll bet she meets us at the door of heaven with a big pitcher of water and a lot of buckwheat cakes, hot and toasted on both sides, like Bob and me was fond of. How long will it be first? I don't know, not very long. The man's eyes were fixed upon the northern horizon. In the blue vault of heaven there appeared 3 little specks, which increased in size every moment so rapidly as they did approach. They speedily resolved themselves into 3 large brown birds, which carried over the heads of the 2 wanderers, and then settled upon some rocks which overlooked them. They were buzzards, the vultures of the west, whose coming is the forerunner of death. Cocks and hens, cried the little girl gleefully, pointing at their ill-omened forms and clapping her hands to make them rise. Say, did God make this country? In course he did, said her companion, rather startled by this unexpected question. He made the country down to Illinois, and he made the Missouri, the little girl continued. I guess somebody else made the country in these parts. It's not nearly so well done. They forgot the water in the trees. What would ye think of offering up a prayer? The man asked differently. It ain't night yet, she answered. It don't matter. It ain't quite regular, but he won't mind that. You bet? You say over them ones that you used to say every night in the wagon when we was on the plains. Why don't we say some yourself? The child asked, with wandering eyes. I disremember them, he answered. I hain't said none since I was half height o' that gun. I guess it's never too late. You say them out and I'll stand by and come in on the choruses. Then you'll need to kneel down, and me too, she said, laying the shawl out for that purpose. You've got to put your hands up like this. It makes you feel kind of good. It was a strange sight. Had there been anything but buzzards to see it? Side by side on the narrow shawl knelt 2 wanderers, the little prattling child and the reckless, hardened adventurer. Her chubby face and his haggard, angular visage were both turned up to the clouds, or I should say to the cloudless heavens, in the heartfelt entreaty to that dread being with whom we are face to face, while the 2 voices, the one thin and clear and the other deep and harsh, united in the entreaty for mercy and forgiveness. The prayer finished, they resumed their seat in the shadow of the boulder until the child fell asleep. Nestling upon the broad breast of her protector, he watched over her slumber for some time, but nature proved to be too strong for him. For 3 days and 3 nights he had allowed himself neither rest nor response. Slowly the eyelids drooped over the tired eyes, and the head sank lower and lower upon the breast, until the man's grizzled beard was mixed with the golden tresses of his companion, and both slept the same deep, dreamless slumber. Had the wanderer remained awake for another half-hour, strange sight would have met his eyes. Far away on the extreme verge of the alkali plain, there rose a little gray spray of dust, very slight at first, and hardly to be distinguished from the mists of the distance, but gradually growing higher and broader until it formed a solid, well-defined cloud. This cloud continued to increase in size until it became evident that it could only be raised by a great multitude of moving creatures. In the more fertile spots, the observer could have come to the conclusion that one of these great herds of bison, which grazed upon the prairie land, was approaching him. This was obviously impossible in these arid wilds. As the whirl of dust drew near to the solitary bluff upon the two castaways where they were reposing, the caravan covered tilts of wagons, and the figures of armed horsemen began to show up through the haze, and the apparition revealed itself as being a great caravan upon its journey for the west. But what a caravan! When the head of it had reached the base of the mountain, the rear was not yet visible on the horizon. Right across the enormous plain stretched the straggling array, wagons, carts, men on horseback, and men on foot, innumerable women who staggered along under burdens, and children who toddled beside the wagons or peeped out from under the white coverings. This was evidently no ordinary party of immigrants, but rather some nomad people who had compelled from stress or circumstance to seek themselves a new country. There rose through the clear air a confused clattering, a rumbling from the great mass of humanity, with the creaking wheels and the neighing horses. Loud as it was not sufficient to rouse the two tired wayfarers above them. At the head of the column there rode a score of more of grave, iron-faced men, clad in somber homespun garments and armed with rifles. On reaching the base of the bluff, they halted and held short council among themselves. "The wells to the right, my brothers," said one, a hard-lipped, clean-shaven man with grizzly hair. "To the right of the Sierra Blanco, so we shall reach the Rio Grande," said another. "Fear not for water," cried the third. "He who could draw it from the rocks will now abandon his own chosen people." "Amen, amen," responded the whole party. They were about to resume their journey when one of the youngest, keenest-eyed, uttered an exclamation and pointed up at the rugged crag above them. From its summit there fluttered a little wisp of pink, showing up hard and bright against the gray rocks behind. At the sight there was a general reining up of horses and an unslinging of guns. With fresh horsemen came galloping up to reinforce the vanguard. The word "Redskins" was on every lip. "There can't be any number of Injuns here," said the elderly man, who appeared to be in command. "We have passed the Pawnees, and there are no other tribes until we cross the great mountains." "Shall I go forward and see, Brother Stangerson?" asked one of the band. And I," cried a dozen voices. "Leave your horses below, and we will wait for you here," the elder answered. In a moment the young fellows had dismounted, unfastened their horses, and were ascending the precipitous slope, which led up to the object which had excited their curiosity. They advanced rapidly and noiselessly, with the confidence and dexterity of practiced scouts. The watchers from the plain below could see them from the flit of a rock, until their figures stood out against the skyline. The young man who had given the first alarm was leading them. Suddenly his followers saw him throw up his hands, as though overcome with astonishment, and on joining him they were affected in the same way by the sight which met their eyes. On the little plateau which crowned the barren hill there stood a single giant boulder, and against the boulder there lay a tall man, long-bearded and hard-featured, with an excessive thinness. His placid face and regular breathing showed he was fast asleep. Beside him lay a little child, with her round little arms encircling his brown, sinewy neck, and her golden hair and head resting on the breast of his velveteen tunic. Her rosy lips were parted, showing the regular line of snow-white teeth within, and a playful smile played over her infantile features. Her plump little white legs, terminating in white socks and neat shoes with shining buckles offered a strange contrast to the long, shriveled members of her companion. On the ledge of the rock above the strange couple there stood three solemn buzzards, who, at the sight of the newcomers, uttered raucous screams of disappointment and flapped sullenly away. The cries of the foul birds awoke the two sleepers, who stared about them in bewilderment. The man staggered to his feet and looked down upon the plain which had been so desolate when sleep had overtaken him, and which now traversed by this enormous body of men and beasts. His face assumed an expression of incredulity as he gazed, and he passed his bony hand over his eyes. "This is what they call delirium, I guess," he muttered. The child stood beside him, holding on the skirt of his coat, and said nothing, but looked all around with wondering, questioning gaze of childhood. The rescuing party were speedily able to convince the two castaways that their appearance was no delusion. One of them seized the little girl and hoisted her upon his shoulder, while two others supported her gaunt companion and assisted him towards the wagons. "My name is John Ferrier," the wanderer explained. "Me and that little are the only two that's left of 21 people. The rest is all dead of thirst and hunger, away down in the south." "Is she your child?" asked someone. "I guess she is now," the other cried defiantly. "She's mine because I saved her. No man will take her away from me. She's Lucy Ferrier from this day on." "Who are you, though?" he continued, glancing with curiosity at his stalwart, sunburned rescuers. "There seems to be a powerful lot of ye." "Nigh upon 10,000, said one of the young men. "We are the persecuted children of God, the chosen of the angel Moroni." "I never heard of him," said the wanderer. "He appears to have chosen a fair crowd of ye." "Do not jest at that which is sacred," said the other sternly. "We are those who believe in the sacred writings drawn in Egyptian letters on the plates of beaten gold, which were handed unto the holy Joseph Smith at Palmyra. We have come from Nauvoo in the state of Illinois, where we had founded our temple. We have come to seek refuge from the violent man and from the godless, even though it be the heart of the desert." The man of Nauvoo evidently recalled recollections of Jean Ferrier. "I see," he said. "You are the Mormons." "We are the Mormons," answered his companions with one voice. "And where are you going?" "We do not know. The hand of God is leading us under the person of our prophet. You must come before him. He shall say what is to be done with you." They had reached the base of a hill by this time, and they were surrounded by crowds of pilgrims, pale-faced, meek-looking women, strong, laughing children, and anxious, earnest-eyed men. Many were the cries of astonishment and the commiseration which arose from them when they perceived the youth of one of the strangers and the destitution of the other. Their escort did not halt, however, but pushed on, followed by a great crowd of Mormons, until they reached a wagon which was conspicuous for its great size and for the gaudiness and smartness of its appearance. 6 horses were yoked to it, whereas the others were furnished with 2, or at most 4 apiece. Besides the driver, there sat a man who could not have been more than 30 years of age, but whose massive head and resolute expression marked him as a leader. He was reading a brown-backed volume, but as the crowd approached, he laid it aside and listened attentively to an account of the episode. Then he turned to the 2 castaways. "If we take you with us," he said in solemn words, "it can only be as believers of our own creed. We shall have no wolves in our fold. Better far that your bones should bleach in this wilderness than that you should prove to be that little speck of decay which in time corrupts the whole fruit. Will you come with us on these terms?" "Guess I'll come with you on any terms," said Ferrier, with such emphasis that the grave elders could not restrain a smile. The leader alone restrained his stern, impressive expression. "Take him, Brother Stangerson," he said. "Give him food and drink, and the child likewise. Let it be your task also to teach him our holy creed. We have delayed long enough. Forward on to Zion." On to Zion!" cried the crowd of Mormons, and the words rippled down the long caravan, passing from mouth to mouth until they died away in a dull murmur in the far distance, with a crackling of whips and a creaking of wheels, and the great wagon got into motion, and soon the whole caravan was winding along once more. The elder to whose care the two waifs had been committed led them to this wagon, where a meal was already awaiting them. "You shall remain here," he said. "In a few days you will have recovered from your fatigues. In the meantime, remember that now and forever you are of our religion. Brigham Young has said it, and he has spoken with the voice of Joseph Smith, which is the voice of God." Now you might be wondering, how in the world does part one of A Study in Scarlet, which takes place with Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, and officers from Scotland Yard, all in London, how does this all connect with these strangers in the desert and these 10,000 Mormons on their pilgrimage to find Zion? Well, let me just say that what we're reading now is sort of a flashback, or the precursor, the prelude to the story of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in London. So we have essentially traveled back in time a little ways to a time and a place that precedes the events and the murder that we all experienced or witnessed or read about in London. And so we continue now with part 2 of A Study in Scarlet, chapter 2, The Flower of Utah. This is not the place to commemorate the trials and privations endured by immigrant Mormons before they had in their final heaven. From the shores of the Mississippi to the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, they had struggled on with a constancy almost unparalleled in history. The savage man and the savage beast, hunger, thirst, fatigue, and disease, every impediment which nature could place in the way, had been overcome with Anglo-Saxon tenacity. Yet the long journey and the accumulated terrors had shaken the hearts of the stoutest among them. There was not one who did not sink upon his knees in heartfelt prayer when they saw the broad valley of Utah bathed in the sunlight beneath them, and learned from the lips of their leader that this was the promised land, and that these virgin acres were to be theirs forevermore. Young speedily proved himself to be a skillful administrator, as well as a resolute chief. Maps were drawn and charts prepared in which the future city was sketched out. All around, farms were apportioned and allotted in proportion to the standing of each individual. The tradesman was put to his trade, and the artisan to his calling. The town streets and squares sprang up as if by magic, and in the country there were draining and hedging, planting and clearing, until the next summer saw the whole country golden with a wheat crop. Everything prospered in the strange settlement. Above all, the great temple, which they had erected in the center of the city, grew ever taller and larger. From the first blush of the dawn until the closing of twilight, the clatter of the hammer and the rasp of the saw were never absent from the monument which the immigrants erected to him who had led them safe through many dangers. The two castaways, John Ferrier and the little girl who had shared his fortunes and had been adopted as his daughter, accompanied the Mormons to the end of their great pilgrimage. Little Lucy Ferrier was borne along pleasantly enough in Elder Stangerson's wagon. A retreat she shared with the Mormon's 3 wives and with his son, a headstrong, forward boy of 12, having rallied with the elasticity of childhood from the shock caused by her mother's death. She soon became a pet with the women and reconciled herself to this new life in her moving, canvas-covered home. In the meantime, Ferrier, having recovered from his privations, distinguished himself as a useful guide and an indefatigable hunter. So rapidly did he gain the esteem of his new companions that when they reached the end of their wanderings, it was unanimously agreed that he should be provided with a large and as fertile a tract of land as any of the settlers, with the exception of Young himself and of Stangerson, Kimball, Johnston, and Drebber, who were the 4 principal elders. On the farm thus acquired, John Ferrier built himself a substantial log house, which received so many additions in succeeding years that it grew into a roomy villa. He was a man of practical turn of mind, keen in his dealings and skillful with his hands. His iron constitution enabled him to work morning and evening at improving and tilling his lands. Hence it came out that his farm and all that belonged to him prospered exceedingly. In 3 years he was better off than his neighbors. In 6 he was well-to-do. In the 9th he was rich, and in the 12th there were not half a dozen men in the whole of Salt Lake City who could compare with him. From the great inland sea to the distant Wasatch Mountains, there was no name better known than that of John Ferrier. There was one way, and only one way, in which he offered the susceptibilities of his co-religionists. No argument or persuasion could ever induce him to set up a female establishment after the manner of his companions. He never gave reasons for his persistent refusal, but contented himself by resolutely and inflexibly adhering to his determination. There were some who accused him of lukewarmness in his adopted religion, and others who put it down to greed of wealth and reluctance to incur expense. Others again spoke of some early love affair and of a fair-haired girl who had pined away in the shores of the Atlantic. Whatever the reason, Ferrier remained strictly celibate. In every other aspect he conformed to the religion of the young settlement, and gained the name of being an orthodox and straight-walking man. Lucy Ferrier grew up within the log house and assisted her adopted father in all his undertakings. The keen air of the mountains and the balsamic odor of the pine trees took the place of a nurse and mother to the young girl. As year succeeded to year, she grew taller and stronger, her cheek more ruddy and her step more elastic. Many a wayfarer upon the high road which ran by Ferrier's farm felt long forgotten. Thoughts revived in his mind as he watched her lithe, girlish figure tripping through the wheat fields, or met her mounted upon her father's Mustang, managing it with all the ease and grace of a true child of the West. So the bud blossomed into a flower, and the year which saw her father, the richest of the farmers, left as fair a specimen of American girlhood as could be found in the whole of the Pacific slope. It was not the father, however, who first discovered that the child had developed into a woman. It seldom is in such cases. That mysterious change is so subtle and too gradual to be measured by dates. Least of all does the maiden herself know it, until the tone of a voice or the touch of a hand sets her heart thrilling within her, and she learns with a mixture of pride and of fear that a new and larger nature has awakened within her. There are few who cannot recall that day, and remember the one little incident which heralded the dawn of new life. In the case of Lucy Ferrier, the occasion was serious enough in itself, apart from its future influence on her destiny that of many besides. It was a warm June morning, and the Latter-day Saints were as busy as bees, whose hive they have chosen for their emblem. In the fields and in the streets rose the same hum of human industry. Down the dusty high roads defiled long streams of heavy-laden mules, all heading to the west, for the gold fever had broken out in California, and the overland route lay through the city of the elect. There, too, were droves of sheep and bullocks coming from the outlying pasture lands, the trains of tired immigrants, men and horses equally weary of their interminable journey. Through all this motley assemblage, threading her way through with the skill of an accompanied rider, there galloped Lucy Ferrer, with her fair face flushed with exercise and her long chestnut hair floating out behind her. She had a commission from her father in the city, and was dashing as she had done many a time before, with all the fearlessness of youth, thinking only of her task and how it was to be performed. The travel-stained adventurers gazed after her in astonishment, and even the unemotional Indians journeying in with the peltry relaxed their accustomed stoicism as they marveled at the beauty of the pale-faced maiden. She had reached the outskirts of the city when she found the road blocked by a great drove of cattle, driven by half a dozen wild-looking herdsmen from the plains. In her impatience, she endeavored to pass this obstacle by pushing her horse into what appeared to be a gap. Scarcely had she got fairly into it, however, before the beasts closed in behind her, and she found herself completely embedded in the moving stream of fierce-eyed, long-horned bullocks. Accustomed as she was to deal with cattle, she was not alarmed at her situation, but took advantage of every opportunity to urge her horse on in the hope of pushing her way through the cavalcade. Unfortunately, the horns of one of the creatures, either by accident or design, came in violent contact with the flank of the mustang excited it into madness, and in an instant it reared up on its hind legs with a snort of rage, and pranced and tossed in a way that would have unseated any but the most skillful rider. The situation was full of peril. Every plunge at the excited horse brought it against the horns again, and goaded it into fresh madness. It was all that the girl could do to keep herself in the saddle, yet a slip could mean a terrible death under the hoofs of the unwieldy and terrified animals. Unaccustomed to sudden emergencies, her head began to swim and her grip upon the bridle to relax. Choked by the rising cloud of dust and the steam from the struggling creatures, she might have abandoned her efforts in despair, but for a kindly voice at her elbow which assured her of assistance. At the same moment, a sinewy brown hand caught the frightened horse by the curb, and forcing a way through the drove, soon brought her to the outskirts. "You're not hurt, I hope, miss," said her preserver respectfully. She looked up at this dark, fierce face and laughed saucily. "I'm awful frightened," she said naively. "Whoever would have thought that Pancho would have been so scared of a lot of cows?" "Thank God you kept your seat," the other said earnestly. He was a tall, savage-looking young fellow, mounted on a powerful roan horse, and clad in rough dress of a hunter, with a long rifle slung over his shoulder. "I guess you are the daughter of John Ferrier," he remarked. "I saw you ride down from his house. When you see him, ask him if he remembers the Jefferson Hopes of St. Louis. If he is the same Ferrier, my father and he were pretty thick." "Hadn't you better come and ask yourself?" she asked demurely. The young fellow seemed pleased at the suggestion, and his dark eyes sparkled with pleasure. "I'll do so," he said. "You've been in the mountains for 2 months, and are not over and above the visiting condition? He must take us as he finds us." "He had a good deal to thank you for, and so have I," she answered. He's awful fond of me. If those cows had jumped on me, he'd have never got over it." "Neither would I," said her companion. "You? Well, I don't see that it would make much matter to you, anyhow. You ain't even a friend of ours." The young hunter's dark face grew so gloomy over this remark that Lucy Ferrier laughed aloud. "There, I didn't mean that," she said. "Of course you are a friend now. You must come and see us. Now I must push along, or father won't trust me with his business any more. Goodbye." "Goodbye," he answered, raising his broad sombrero and bending over her little hand. She wheeled her Mustang around, gave it a cut with her riding whip, and darted away down the broad road in a rolling cloud of dust. Young Jefferson hoped he rode on with his companions, gloomily and taciturn. He and they had been moving among the Nevada mountains prospecting for silver, and they were returning to Salt Lake City in the hope of raising capital enough to work some lodes which they had discovered. He had been as keen as any of them upon the business until this sudden incident had drawn his thoughts into another channel. The sight of the fair young girl, as frank and wholesome as a sea breeze or the Sierra breezes, had stirred his volcanic, untamed heart to its very depths. When she had vanished from his sight, he realized that a crisis had come in his life, and that neither silver speculations nor any other questions could ever be of such importance to him as this new and all-absorbing one. The love which had sprung up in his heart was not the sudden, changeable fancy of a boy, but rather the wild, fierce passion of a man of strong will and imperious temper. He had been accustomed to succeed in all he undertook. He swore in his heart he would not fail in this human effort, and human perseverance could render him successful. He called on John Ferrier that night, and many times again, until his face was a familiar one at the farmhouse. John, cooped up in the valley and absorbed in his work, had little chance of learning the news of the outside world during his 12 years. All this Jefferson Hope was able to tell him, and in a style which interested Lucy as well as her father. He had been a pioneer in California, and could narrate many a strange tale of fortunes made and fortunes lost in those wild halcyon days. He had been a scout, too, and a trapper, a silver explorer, and a ranchman. Wherever stirrings ventured were to be had, Jefferson Hope had been there in search of them. He soon became a favorite with the old farmer, who spoke eloquently of his virtues. On such occasions Lucy was silent, but her blushing cheek and her bright, happy eyes showed only too clearly that her young heart was no longer her own. Her honest father may not have observed these symptoms, but they were assuredly not thrown away upon the man who had won her affections. It was a summer evening when he came galloping down the road and pulled up at the gate. She was at the doorway and came down to meet him. He threw the bridle over the fence and strode on the pathway. "I am off, Lucy," he said, taking her two hands in his and gazing tenderly down at her face. "I won't ask you to come with me now, but will you be ready to come with me when I am here again?" "And when will that be?" she asked, blushing and laughing. "A couple of months at the outside. I will come and claim you then, my darling. There's no one who can stand between us." "And how about your father?" "And how about father?" asked she. "He has given his consent, provided we get these mines working all right." "I have no fear of that." "Oh, well, of course, if you and father have arranged it all, there's no more to be said," she whispered, with her cheek against his broad breast. "Thank God," he said, hoarsely, stooping and kissing her. "It is settled, then. The longer I stay, the harder it will be to go. They are waiting for me at the canyon. Goodbye, my own darling, goodbye. In 2 months you shall see me." He tore himself from her as he spoke, and flinging himself upon his horse, galloped furiously away, never even looking round, as though afraid that his resolution might fail him if he took one glance at what he was leaving. She stood at the gate, gazing after him until he vanished from her sight, and then she walked back to the house, the happiest girl in Utah. All right, my friends, I think that is a good place for us to stop tonight. This is a new and very interesting turn of events in our story, A Study in Scarlet. And I'm happy we're out of London and in Utah and in the Old West of the United States. This makes the story a little bit more interesting and relatable, at least for me. I hope it is for you too. Well, until tomorrow, this has been Indiana Holmes. Love to you all, and good night.